A man crosses a shallow river ford alone in the dead of night, and something grabs him. It was the small hours before dawn. The text says a night in the region east of the Jordan, sometime in the 2nd millennium BC, though no one has ever fixed it closer than that. And before first light, Jacob of the Hebrews would either be destroyed or transformed into something he had never been before. He fought until his hip was wrenched from its socket. He still refused to let go. And whatever it was he was fighting, it told him, "You are no longer Jacob, you are Israel." That single night beside the Jabbok River has haunted readers, scholars, rabbis, theologians, and ordinary curious people for roughly 3,000 years. Was it an angel, a divine being, a demon, his own conscience, a memory so ancient the original meaning was already lost by the time anyone wrote it down? We are going to wade into all of it, but here is what I want you to hold on to from the very beginning. The wrestling match did not come out of nowhere. It was the violent punctuation mark at the end of an entire life spent struggling, scheming, fleeing, loving, grieving, and being slowly undone and remade. To understand that one strange night, you have to understand everything that came before it. So let us go back to the very beginning, all the way to a womb in which a war was already being fought. The story of Jacob opens before he ever draws his first breath. His mother, Rebekah, is pregnant with twins, and she feels them fighting inside her so fiercely that she asks God what is happening. The answer she reportedly receives is startling. 2 nations are in your womb. The older will serve the younger. That reversal of the expected order, the younger overturning the elder, is the engine that drives everything that follows for the next several decades. Jacob's entire life is built around that prophecy and the upheaval it causes. When the twins are born, the elder arrives first. He is called Esau, which connects in the Hebrew tradition to the word for rough or hairy, because the child is described as red and covered with hair like a garment. The second twin follows immediately, gripping Esau's heel. He is named Jacob, Yaakov in Hebrew, and the name itself is a pun. It means something like heel grasper, but it also carries the shadow meaning of one who supplants, one who trips you up from behind. From the very moment of birth, the man's name is a warning label, and it takes a while for the people around him to read it. The 2 brothers grow into sharply different men. Esau is a hunter, outdoor and physical, his father Isaac's favorite. Jacob is quieter, a dweller among tents, his mother Rebekah's cherished son. The fault lines in that family run deep, and they surface fast. One day, Esau comes home from hunting, ravenous and exhausted, and Jacob is cooking a rich red stew. Esau demands some. Jacob's response is breathtaking in its cold calculation. "Sell me your birthright first, your legal inheritance, your place as firstborn, your entire future standing in this family. Hand it over for a bowl of food." And Esau, who is either genuinely starving or genuinely impulsive, or both, agrees. He eats. He leaves. And Jacob has just quietly stolen the future without raising his voice. But the bigger theft is still to come. Isaac is old and nearly blind, and he calls Esau to him, asking him to hunt game and make a savory meal so that Isaac can pronounce the formal patriarchal blessing over his eldest son before he dies. That blessing in the ancient Near Eastern world was not merely sentiment. It was binding, legal, and carried the weight of property, leadership, and destiny. Rebekah overhears everything. She goes immediately to Jacob, and together they plot one of the most audacious frauds in the entire Hebrew scripture. Rebekah prepares the savory meal herself from goat meat. She dresses Jacob in Esau's clothes, so he carries his brother's smell. She puts goatskin on Jacob's hands and neck, so that if Isaac reaches out to touch him, he will feel the roughness of Esau's skin. Jacob walks into his father's tent and lies, directly, to the old man's face. "I am Esau," he says. Isaac is suspicious. The voice sounds wrong, but he reaches out, feels the goatskin, smells the clothing, and gives the blessing, the firstborn's inheritance, the lordship over his brothers. the covenant passed down from Abraham. Jacob walks out of that tent, carrying everything that was meant for someone else. When Esau finds out, the text says, he weeps with a bitter and great cry. He asks if there is any blessing left for him. There is almost nothing. And then Esau, in his grief and rage, decides that when Isaac dies, he will kill his brother. Jacob has to run. He flees north, toward the land of his mother's family in Haran, a journey of hundreds of miles through dangerous territory. And on the first night, something unexpected happens. He stops at a place called Luz, lays his head on a stone to sleep, and he dreams. He sees a ladder, or more accurately, a ramp. The word in the original Hebrew carries the sense of a great staircase, reaching from earth to heaven, with divine beings ascending and descending on it. And God speaks to him directly, renewing the covenant first made with Abraham and Isaac. I am with you, wherever you go, the voice says. I will bring you back to this land. Jacob wakes up shaken. He names the place Bethel, house of God, and sets up the stone as a marker. The runaway fraud has just received the very covenant he stole his brother's blessing to secure. That irony is not lost on the text, and I suspect it was not lost on Jacob either. He arrives in Haran and falls in love almost immediately with Rachel, the younger daughter of his mother's brother Laban. He offers to work 7 years for the right to marry her. Laban agrees. Jacob works the 7 years. On the wedding night, Laban substitutes the older daughter Leah under the veil. Jacob wakes up, married to the wrong woman. He has been deceived by the exact same mechanism he used on his own father, a substitution in the dark, exploiting impaired senses. The man who tricked a blind man with a disguise has just been tricked in the dark himself. He confronts Laban, who is magnificently unapologetic. It is simply not the custom here to marry the younger before the elder. Work another 7 years, and you can have Rachel too. And Jacob does. He works 14 years total for his 2 wives, and then another 6 years for livestock. And across that time he becomes a father to 12 sons and a daughter. Those 12 sons, born to Leah, to Rachel, and to their 2 handmaids, will eventually lend their names to the 12 tribes of Israel. But Jacob does not know that yet. He is simply a man in an impossible extended family, slowly building wealth in a foreign country, while his relationship with Laban grows more and more treacherous on both sides. After 20 years in Haran, Jacob finally decides to go home. He loads up his wives, his children, his flocks, and his possessions, and slips away, while Laban is occupied with sheep shearing. When Laban catches up, there is a furious confrontation. Rachel has secretly stolen her father's household idols, for reasons the text never fully explains, which has fascinated scholars for generations. But eventually the 2 men make an uneasy truce, and Laban turns back. Jacob continues south. And now the real terror begins, because going home means crossing back into the territory where Esau lives. 20 years have passed since Jacob fled, but he has no way of knowing whether his brother's grief has softened or hardened into something permanent. He sends messengers ahead. They return with news. Esau is coming to meet him, with 400 men. Jacob is, by his own account in the text, greatly afraid and distressed. He splits his camp in 2, reasoning that if Esau attacks one group, the other might survive. He sends ahead elaborate gifts, hundreds of goats, sheep, camels, cattle, donkeys, wave after wave of them, hoping to soften his brother before they ever come face to face. And then he does something strange. He sends everyone across the Jabbok river ahead of him, his wives, his children, his servants, everything he owns. He is left alone on the far bank, utterly alone, in the middle of the night. This is where we came in. Something, the text says simply, wrestled with him until the breaking of dawn. The Hebrew word used is a form of avak, to grapple, to kick up dust. The same root, scholars have noted, is buried in the river's name, Jabbok. The place is named for the struggle, and the struggle lasts all night. Whoever or whatever Jacob is fighting cannot overpower him, even after wrenching his hip from its socket, which, if you have ever dislocated a hip, you know means Jacob is fighting on pure will at that point, in extraordinary pain, in the dark. As dawn approaches, the other figure asks to be released. Jacob's answer is one of the most extraordinary lines in the entire biblical text. I will not let you go unless you bless me. Think about that. The man has spent his entire life grasping at blessings. He grabbed Esau's heel at birth. He took the birthright for a bowl of stew. He stood in front of his dying blind father, wearing a disguise, and lied to get the blessing. Every blessing Jacob has ever received, he stole or maneuvered for. And now, at the lowest and most terrified point of his life, alone in the dark with a wrenched hip, fighting something he cannot see or name, he is still demanding a blessing. He has not changed his nature. He has merely stripped everything else away from it. The figure asks him his name. He says, Jacob. And the figure says, your name will no longer be Jacob. It will be Israel, one who strives with God, or one whom God strives with, or perhaps both at once, because the Hebrew carries that ambiguity beautifully. Jacob asks the figure's name. The answer he receives is a question. Why do you ask my name? And then the blessing is given. Jacob limps away from the ford at sunrise, and he names the place Peniel, face of God, because, he says, I have seen God face to face and lived. Now, what actually happened at the Jabbok? This is the question that has never stopped generating answers. The ancient rabbinical tradition largely held that Jacob wrestled with Esau's guardian angel, a celestial counterpart of his brother, protecting the elder's interests even in heaven. Early Christian interpreters often read the figure as a theophany, a direct appearance of the divine, specifically prefiguring Christ. Some modern scholars, working from comparative mythology, point to parallels in other ancient Near Eastern traditions where a hero must fight a river demon or spirit at a ford before crossing into a new land. Rivers were boundaries in the ancient world, and boundaries were places of danger, threshold moments where normal rules suspended. The ford of a river at night was, in every ancient culture around the Eastern Mediterranean, a place where you might encounter something that was not human. There is a psychoanalytic reading too, which you do not have to accept, but which is genuinely compelling, that the figure Jacob fights is Jacob himself, that the entire life of scheming and running and substituting and disguising has produced a man who has never fully faced who he is. And the night alone at the Jabbok, stripped of family, flocks, weapons, every role he has ever played, forces the confrontation at last. He cannot win it without being broken first. The hip that gives way is the price of the blessing. He carries the limp for the rest of his life, the text tells us, as a permanent mark of what happened in the dark. Whatever you believe the struggle was, the transformation it produces is real and immediate. When Jacob crosses the ford the next morning and sees Esau approaching with his 400 men, he does not send more gifts. He does not hide behind his family. He goes out in front, ahead of everyone, and bows to the ground 7 times as he approaches his brother. It is, by any measure, an act of extraordinary vulnerability for a man who has spent decades calculating his every move. And Esau's response is one of the most quietly devastating moments in the whole story. He runs to meet Jacob, embraces him, falls on his neck, and weeps. After 20 years. After everything, the brothers hold each other at the edge of a field and cry. The reconciliation does not erase everything. The two men eventually settle in different territories, and their descendants will circle each other with tension for generations. But in that moment, something is genuinely resolved. The heel grasper who stole everything finally gives something back, his pride. Jacob's later years carry more grief than his early ones. He settles in Canaan, returns to Bethel to honor the vow he made there as a fugitive, and loses his beloved wife Rachel in childbirth. His daughter Dinah is assaulted at the town of Shechem, and the violent reprisals by two of his sons, Simeon and Levi, horrify and endanger the whole clan. His eldest son, Reuben, violates one of Jacob's own concubines in what appears to be a raw power move, an act Jacob will not forget even on his deathbed. And then his favorite son, Joseph, Rachel's firstborn, is brought home, apparently killed by a wild animal. Jacob mourns Joseph for years, refusing to be comforted. Those of you who know where that story goes will recognize that the mourning was built on a lie, but Jacob does not know that yet. He simply carries the grief. In his old age, famine drives the family toward Egypt, where Joseph has in the meantime become the second most powerful official in the known world. The reunion between Jacob and the son he thought was dead is told with very few words in the text, which somehow makes it more wrenching. Jacob says, "Now I can die, since I have seen your face, and you are still alive." If you enjoy digging into this period of history, the patriarchs, the ancient Near East, the stories that shaped three of the world's major religions, this channel is the place to be. Subscribe and join the community here. Every week, we go deeper into the stories most people only think they know, and there is always something stranger waiting just below the surface. Jacob lives 17 years in Egypt. He is 147 years old when he calls his sons to his bedside for the final time. What follows is one of the most remarkable passages in all of the Hebrew scripture, a long poetic blessing in which Jacob addresses each of his 12 sons in turn, and the words he chooses are not uniformly kind. Reuben, the eldest, is told that because he defiled his father's bed, he will not excel. Simeon and Levi are called violent and cursed in their anger for the massacre at Shechem. But Judah is called a lion's cub, and the language attached to him carries the promise of kingship. The scepter will not depart from Judah. Joseph receives the most extensive blessing, poetic and tender, and then Jacob dies, in Egypt, far from the land of his fathers. His final instruction is that he not be buried in Egypt. His body is embalmed. The text actually uses Egyptian funerary terminology, suggesting the compilers knew their Egyptian customs, and a great procession carries him back to Canaan, to the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham and Isaac and their wives are buried. Jacob is laid to rest with his ancestors, and what lingers, 3,000 or 4,000 years later, is the strangeness and completeness of this particular life. Jacob is not presented as a saint. He is a man who lies, manipulates, plays favorites, frightens easily, and carries his wounds badly. He is also a man who loved deeply, worked faithfully for 20 years in a foreign country, refused to release a blessing even when he was broken, and looked his estranged brother in the eye after 20 years with nothing but his bare hands open. The Bible does not sand down those contradictions. It leaves them whole. The name Israel, the nation, the land, the people who have carried that identity across millennia, comes from one night at a river ford when a frightened, flawed man in the dark refused to let go. Whatever you think he was fighting, the stubbornness is human and recognizable in a way that crosses every century between his moment and ours. Here is the question I keep sitting with, and I would love to hear your answer in the comments. Do you think Jacob changed at the Jabbok, truly, fundamentally changed, or did the wrestling simply reveal what had always been there? Because those are two very different stories, and the text, honestly, supports both. Tell me what you think. If this episode sparked your curiosity, you might want to look at what we did on Joseph, the son Jacob mourned and thought was dead, whose own story goes to places even stranger than his father's. And if you have not yet subscribed to Scholar Eli, now is a fine moment. There is a great deal more of the ancient world waiting, and we are always happy to have a fellow curious mind along for the journey. Until next time.